Hello, my name's Becky Safe. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to look at ways to compress your bass. Now, compression of your music will give you a thick, low end, and heavy compression will give you a fuller sound. But it's not just as simple as throwing a compressor onto your bass track. What you want is control whilst also maintaining dynamic range and the thickness and fullness that you want out of a bass. In this video, I do have a free rack available for you to download. It's in the description, and I'm going to walk you through how you can set up your own bass compression rack. So if you want to walk it through with me, or if you just want to download the pre-made one, then the link is in the description. Bass compression is important for the foundation of your track, and it's crucial for genres like electronic music, house, dance, bass music, trap, hip hop. All the modern dance floor tracks really do require you to get a nice, thick, controlled low end. The timestamps to this video are below in the description, so you can skip back and forth to your favorite section. And this video was actually suggested by a viewer of the channel. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, then please jump into the Discord, as there is a designated channel in there where you can drop in your suggestions. We're only going to be using Ableton stock plugins today, so if you are an Ableton user and that's all you have, then this is the video for you. And if you're not an Ableton user, you can actually apply these techniques to your DAW of choice, as it is pretty much universal. So we're into Ableton, and here's a bass. On the bass track, we're going to drop our audio effect rack. So this is where we're going to build the one that's available for download. And the first thing we're going to do is multi-band compression. Bass can sometimes be misleading because when you think of bass, you think low end, but actually it is made up of lots of frequencies, filling the entire frequency spectrum, mid-range, and even the upper frequencies as well. And so sticking a compressor onto your entire bass track means that the compressor is responding to not only the lows, the mids, but also the highs. And so because we're sculpting our bass at different dynamic levels across the frequency spectrum, we need to separate our bands so that the compressors can react accordingly to each particular band. So let's jump into the audio effect rack, and I'm going to create 3 chains. So I'm right clicking, create chain, and the first one is going to be the lows, then the mids, and the highs. And on here now we're going to stick an EQ8. So on each chain we have an EQ8, and now I'm going to do a low pass filter on the lows, take it down to around 80 Hertz. Sub bass is generally between 20 and 60, so 80 is definitely going to capture the sub frequencies. Next, on to the mids, we're going to do a high pass, and we're going to do that at 80 Hertz. So now we're kind of crossing over that point, and then we're also going to do a low pass so that we roll off the highs. And then on the highs, we're going to do a high pass so that we're just isolating the upper frequencies. And now you can see that we have our isolated bands of lows, mids, and highs. Next, we will stick our compressor onto each chain. And obviously in this video, I'm only talking about compression of the bass, but if you do want a more detailed bass processing video, then please check out my 5 tips to process your bass. So we're onto the low chain, and we're now going to compress our sub frequencies. I'm just going to play it for you so you can hear it. And let's isolate the lows. When it comes to compressing your sub, you want to make sure that you're controlling the dynamic range so that it helps it to sit in the mix more. You want that thickness, but you want the control at the same time. So we're going to pull down the threshold on our gain reduction. We're also going to bring the attack down a little bit so it's quite fast, but we don't want to shave off the transients too much because we do want a little bit of that knock from the sub to come through. So not a super fast attack, but kind of fairly fast attack. As this bass doesn't have any gaps in it, the release is not really going to come into play until there's actually a moment of silence. So when you have gaps between your bass notes, play with the release so that the compressor at least deactivates before it reactivates again. So you might want a fairly fast release, but just enough so that it kind of tails off in those gaps. And I'd say a 4:1 ratio is a little bit hard, so I'm going to bring it down. And if you listen to this portion of the track where the transient starts again at bar 65, you can hear where the attack and the release really do come into play, because you do hear that transient coming through, which is nice when you've got that punch of the sub, so not too fast on your attack. So the mid-range of your bass is where all the character is. It's where you can really play with the dynamics, and it's what's going to transfer mostly onto most sound systems. When we're doing mid-range bass compression, we need to make sure that we maintain the dynamic range, so it doesn't need to be too hard. If anything, you need a pretty slow attack and a pretty slow release, so that the compressor is not working too much and you're maintaining the dynamics of the mid-range. So it's a little bit less control than on the sub, and therefore we're hearing that kind of movement that is going on the mid-range. Onto the high frequencies, and the reason why I would separate these from the mids is because a lot of the processing that you do on the mids could transfer into the highs, and it could push the highs up a lot louder or at a different dynamic level, which could throw off the balance of your bass altogether. The highs are kind of like the extra sparkle on your bass. They are the bits that can create some stereo width and interest, but they're not the main story. They're not the main character of your bass, and therefore they don't need to be dynamically superior to the mid-range. And so if you start to compress the mid-range and then that compresses the highs in the same way, you could throw the balance of your bass off. So we're separating the highs and we're going to compress these independently of our mid-range. And in this particular instance, we don't actually hear a lot of the high-end content. So this is why it's actually really important to separate your mids from your highs, so that you can at least get some high-end content in your mix. So in order to get more of that high-end content into this compressor, I'm going to increase the gain on the EQ8. And then we're going to have a fairly slow attack and a fairly slow release, so that we're getting the transients of that crunch coming through. I'm going to leave it on a 4:1 ratio and then bring the threshold down. And then finally add some makeup gain so that we can bring the dynamics back up in the mix. And that's going to bring our high end nicely back in balance with the mid-range bass. Let's listen to all three bands together. And I'm sure you can hear there that we have the fullness of the bass, but we also have the control of the lows, the mids, and the highs independently of each other, which you wouldn't get if you just throw a compressor onto your bass track, because then it's responding to the entire frequency spectrum. The secret to getting more out of your bass is to compress and then to compress again. So we've done multi-band compression directly on the track, and now we can use the glue compressor, which is a brilliant compressor in Ableton, to glue all of those parts together. So the glue compressor will go onto your bass group, and you're going to have a fairly medium attack, medium release, and a medium ratio, and you're just going to do a very small amount so that it glues all of the parts together and so they sound consistent with each other. So we're going to bring down the threshold. And then add some makeup gain. So now we're doing compression on top of the compression that we've already done, and so it's really starting to control all of the dynamics and glue everything together. But no, it does not stop there. We do have one more compression technique, and that is parallel compression. Parallel compression is a fantastic way to get more thickness out of your bass without losing the dynamic range. So we've got the dynamics, we've got the control using our multi-band compression, we've glued it all together on the group, and now we're going to blend in a thicker parallel chain so that we don't lose the dynamic range, but we do increase that fullness or perceived fullness of the sound. And obviously in parallel, we're going to use a return channel, and I actually have this return channel set up with the bass, punch, and parallel. So you'll find this on the glue compressor. If you press the drop down triangle, you actually have loads of presets, and we have bass, punch, and parallel. So drag and drop that onto a return channel, and what we're going to do is we're going to send the bass to the return channel and blend in the mix. You might want to EQ the return channel. Maybe you want to get more out of the lows or the mid-range. So you could experiment by EQing your parallel compression as well. So I have a utility on here, bass mono, just so that it monos the lower frequencies. And now we're going to bring down the threshold. So we've got lots of gain reduction. We're going to really compress the bass. Whatever is coming through into this return channel is going to be hard compressed because it's not actually the main signal. The main signal is the track in the project. But this parallel chain, if we hard compress it, what it's going to do is it's going to create a really thick, not very dynamic sausage. I used that phrase in the other video as well, but it's not very dynamic, but it is very meaty. It's thick. And so blending that into your original signal means that you can get more thickness out of your bass, but you maintain the dynamic range in your original bass track because they're acting independently of each other. So bring the threshold down, compress this, like super compress this, and then we're going to send our bass to the return channel. So we could go even further on the gain reduction. Let's bring it down. Bring the range down so that we're going even further. And you can even bring the ratio up so that you're hard compressing. And now if we listen just to the parallel compression on the return channel, you can hear the difference. And I'm sure you can hear that there's not much dynamic range going on that channel. If we listen to the actual bass track itself, you can hear that there's a lot more dynamic range going on. You've got a lot more tonality, a lot more character in the actual bass itself, but just on the parallel chain, it's very squashed together. And once you've done that, you've then completed your deep dive into compression of bass. You've controlled the bass by using multi-band compression. You've glued it all together using the glue compressor, and then you thickened it up using parallel compression. I hope you enjoyed this bass compression tutorial, and if you got something out of it, please consider giving it a like. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel as it helps me to help you. And if you're new to Ableton Live, or if you want to master it quickly, check out my Ableton Live course in the description if you like my teaching style. I think there's like 150 videos on the course now. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So check it out below in the description. My name's Becky Safe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you for another one. Bye!